Hey guys, it's Allison Grayce here for another episode of Treehouse Friends. I'm here in Orlando, Florida at the In Control conference with Ben Callahan, the president of Sparkbox. Ben, thanks for being here today.
My pleasure.
So tell us a little bit about Sparkbox and also the Build Responsibly workshops.
Let's see, we started officially in 2009. There were four of us at that time, and we went by a different name at the time, Forge, and actually still the company name, but we work as Sparkbox now. Kind of reinvented ourselves in the beginning of 2011, and we just really started to feel like there was some space available for us, at least, to kind of specialize a bit more on trying to build sites that work at any resolution, responsive web design in particular. At that same time, we had purchased a domain called Build Responsively, kind of jokingly thinking about the idea of drinking responsibly, and weren't quite sure what to do with it, and we had been just learning a ton, over the year previous about how to do this stuff, and somebody had suggested that we start to talk a little bit, share some of the things we were doing, and so we started to do that on our blog, The Foundry, on our site, and just really got the itch for this idea of like a culture of learning in our office itself, and so we started to speak a bit more about it and sort of organize the whole workshop series that we did last year, mostly focused in the Midwest, but we did maybe 6 or 7 events, and they were 2-day events, which took a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
This year we decided to try and attach to some bigger conferences like In Control, actually.
Right.
And so that's worked out really well. We've got at least half a dozen lined up for the year. We're really excited. We try to think about the techniques that are needed in responsive web design, but we try to think about it from an approach of just looking for common problems that exist in the industry and ways that we can solve those problems with these techniques. Mm-hmm. That way we're able to kind of bring multiple disciplines into the conversation as opposed to just speaking to front-end developers or people who write CSS, I think the goal is to try and keep more people engaged. We're trying to invite some of the rest of the disciplines into the process with us,
Mm-hmm. So how involved are you with putting on the workshops? Is that something that you do by yourself, or do you have like a team of people?
Man, the first one we did was in Cincinnati. We had every single person from my company spoke. So at that time, I think there were 8 of us, and it was just an amazing time. Most of my team hadn't spoken in public before, so mm-hmm. I was asking a lot of them to get up in front of people and share what they'd learned. But there was just everybody really did it. It was really neat. Since then, we've kind of focused. There's 2 or 3 of us who really enjoy presenting a lot more, something that we're pretty passionate about, and so. There's actually, I think it's 4 of us probably. And so the 4 of us really kind of focus on doing most of the presenting, but everybody helps with content development. And we have 2 or 3 folks in the office who are really organized and can help kind of, make sure things are running smoothly and on schedule and getting the events planned and all of that. So,
Well, while we're on the topic of speaking, have you always been comfortable speaking in front of people and sharing your knowledge? And what advice can you give to people who are thinking about, maybe teaching or starting their own workshops or starting a blog? Like, how do you find the confidence to start sharing what you know?
It's funny, for a long time, I haven't done much speaking, to be honest. Let's see, I guess last year in January was the first time I ever spoke in public. And that was at Code Mash up in Sandusky, Ohio, which is a bunch of devs that get together and eat a ton of bacon, basically. But it feels natural to me, so I don't know that I have anything to say that's like wisdom for how to do it. It's just, I guess at some point enough people told me that we were smart, and so I felt like, I don't really feel like we're that far ahead of other people, but I do think that we're just willing to share everything that we know. The truth is, as I've traveled around and met a bunch of people who come to these workshops and other conferences, everybody that I meet has something that I can pull from, and so these engagements for us, what we're speaking, are more just as much. We get just as much out of them from speaking and learning from the people who attend as they do from us, maybe even more.
Right.
So encouragement, I would say, you have something that you're good at, and if you're good at it, write about it to start with. Just start documenting what you do. It's good for you, even if nobody reads it. It's good for you to be able to go back and find that stuff. But you'll see that you'll quickly get an audience because there's people hungry for this information,
Speaking of an audience too, you're currently redesigning the Sparkbox website live for everyone to see.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about why you decided to do that. Most people don't invite people into their process like that, so that's kind of a really cool idea.
Why did we do it? Let's see. There's probably a handful of reasons. Like I said before, I feel like we're trying to build a culture of learning. And so for us, it's not easy to write all of the time, but we require everybody in the office to write. And this gave us some really poignant subject matter, I think, to cover in terms of writing. So it's an opportunity to kind of introduce the rest of the team to writing more about the problems that they're solving. It's also a little bit of accountability for us, It's if you're out there and you've had to redesign your own site, you know how hard that can be. And putting it out there, like for the rest of our peers to see and give feedback on, has been an opportunity to kind of say to us, look, this is important to do. We have to make time for this. We have to make sure that we have obligations to clients, obviously, but this is just as important as that work too. And we've been using for a year, we've been using our website as an example of actually some things not to do in our workshops, because it's one of the first sites that we built with some of these techniques. We've learned so much in a year or two, and so it was time to do it.
Yeah. I bet that pressure too of like letting everyone see your timeline and kind of opening it up for people to see kind of like really makes you stick to it and get it done.
Yeah, I mean, the holidays hit kind of right in the middle, so we've actually been a little quiet, but later this week we'll have some sort of, we're kicking it back up, But to be honest, if you have the illusion that what you're doing on the web is private, then you're probably mistaken, because all of our work is out there. People can view source on pretty much anything we do. So it's kind of the nature of the industry too,
So you mentioned how your site was an example of what not to do. What do you mean by that?
So a perfect example, right? If you go to the Sparkbox Foundry and go to any post, and you're on, say, a small device, what you will see will actually look more like a 404 page than an article. And that's because we didn't think so much about the usability of the site when we did it. We were kind of obsessed, we got caught up in the three, sort of prime techniques of responsive web design. What we ended up doing was taking a big site and just cramming it onto a small device, which is not how this should work, There's a lot more to it than that. And that work was primarily done by front-end developers. And so one of the things that we talk a lot about in our workshop is that you have to invite the rest of the team into the conversation. And we speak about this idea of collaboration. Obviously, everybody who's talking about this stuff and has done it knows that you've got to have the right team members in the room to make decisions. We've actually found that we do something that I don't even know if this is new or not, but we call it natural decisions, because in a more linear process, more traditional process, what we've seen is one person or one discipline feels like they need to finish their thing and get to the deliverable and hand it to the next person. They feel like they have to make all of the decisions about that specific discipline early in the process. So what we try to do is delay decisions as long as we can, right? We're waiting until it's the right time to make those decisions. So I'm not forcing my UX people or whoever's doing wireframes or whatever to have all of that done and figured out before we've gotten into the code. That just doesn't make any sense. Things are too dynamic, too fluid. So I was talking to Samantha Warren last night, and she said, there is no responsive process. It's got to be, the process itself has to be responsive. It has to change for the project, and that's very true. Very true.
So speaking of kind of the process, there's all this buzz about designing in the browser and trying to figure out that process, because I think saying that a process is responsive, bosses and clients don't like that, right? Yeah. So how do you think that's going to work for moving forward? Do you think that designers there's less of a deliverable at the end for them? Do you think that maybe, how is that process, how do you envision that process changing?
I mean, I said a little bit earlier that I feel like it's really more about collaboration. For us, we end up putting front-end developers with designers at the same computer, like if you know about pair programming, we do that with content people and technical people. We do that with every person, every discipline in our office pairs with other disciplines. And we do that because I want all of my team to broaden their knowledge about the web as a whole. That gives them the ability to sort of be informed at least and help make better decisions, when they're tasked with doing something on their own. But we, early in the process, I'll put my technical director and my content director in the room, to lock them in the conference room together, right, with a projector, and let them figure out how to get a basis for the site started. Like, those are the two people that really need to be there right at the beginning. Somebody's got to get the architecture of the thing, something functional built, technical director, and somebody understands the content early in our process, right? And those are the two that have to figure out how this stuff's going to actually live together. So we put them together early. They get something built that we can actually use during our dev process. And then we do something called style prototypes, and we run that in parallel with something called a content priority prototype. These are both deliverables that happen in the browser for us. So it's HTML and it's some CSS. And they're separate at this point. We try to make sure that deliverables we offer that aren't intended to focus on design look as ugly as they can. Because I've been in too many meetings with beautiful wireframes where my clients are commenting about colors or layout or something, and it's like, okay, let's just cut this stuff out. So we show pretty much unstyled HTML in what is like a prototype, but with real content, as much real content in it as we can very early. And we do that in a linear way so that they can see priority. The linear nature kind of forces us to prioritize things. And then at the same time, we're working on a style prototype, which is like an evolution of style tiles from Samantha.
Okay.
But it happens in the browser. Just a basic HTML page, no real content at all. And it's really about typography, color, texture, some of the just core design principles that we have. So our designers build those on their own. If they need a little help, they'll work with somebody who's a specialist in CSS. But we're trying to get them to build these on their own because they need to know CSS. There's a big conversation. I don't want to open up that can of worms, but I actually believe that it's very true. If you're going to design for the web, you need to learn some CSS. If you're going to, I think this is true too, if you're going to write content for the web, you should probably learn some HTML.
Right.
That's semantics, right?
Yeah, because you used to be able to get a job as a web designer knowing just a few CSS, a little bit of CSS, a little bit of HTML. Now it seems like the expectations are so much higher with having to know HTML5, CSS3, less, and Sass, and all this stuff. Yeah. So what do you think a web designer needs just to get into the door these days?
Web designer? What does that even mean?
Do you think there's a bigger gulf now between a front-end designer and then maybe someone who's a front-end developer than there used to be, or do you still think that someone should wear both hats? Yeah,
so my technical director is Rob Haar, and he keeps saying this thing in the office where he says that Sass or less, I think, is kind of one of the more popular first preprocessors, but he says, these preprocessors for CSS were like a gateway drug for front-end devs, What he's trying to say is that there's this whole front-end development thing has gotten so complex, So I feel like front-end devs who lean technical in their nature are shifting towards all of this complex, like local build process stuff with, running Node and Grunt and all this stuff to kind of get a really cool, easy to use front-end development, well, easy to use if you're a technical person, front-end development tool. Or environment running. But then you have designers who started maybe branding in print and are trying to move into this space, and they're going to learn CSS, they're going to learn some HTML. That's great, but they're going to shy away from even using something like Sass if they have to install Ruby, or use the command line. Andy Clark goes on about this, it's like, why is this a command line? Like, make this easy for me to do, He's got a really valid point, which is, at some point, the tooling that we use for doing this stuff is going to settle a little bit, I hope. And we'll start to see there are some clear winners in terms of what you should be doing. And then I think it will, the people who are less technical will be able to come into that and embrace it a bit easier, So
there still is a place for them to coexist. It's not like
Absolutely.
Okay. What is the biggest mistake you see web designers making when designing responsive websites?
Designers like to control things. And designing for the web, if you're going to design for the web, you have to let go of that. That's probably the biggest thing. Is I talk to people all the time about this, and they say, "Well, when do you actually design the site? Like when do you design the site?" And we don't. we still do a lot in Photoshop, but it's becoming more like a sketch pad for us. And the implementation of that is happening in the browser, and that's where it needs to happen. We're trying to get away from making pictures of websites, as so many people are saying these days, and actually building sites themselves. I don't know if that answers the question.
So you think designers maybe get too fixated on perfection of every single pixel and like the type, and then they get uncomfortable when they see it actually live in its environment?
We used to, we were so ridiculous about this stuff. We would, like my designer, my creative director, Jeremy Lloyd, is obsessed with typography. Okay, he loves it. He comes from a branding background, and he just cares about this stuff. And I can remember times where he would literally, the type in Photoshop looked beautiful, but as soon as we would move it to the web, obviously it's going to look different. So I can remember, and then the client, we're showing static comps that were exported from Photoshop, so clients get an expectation about type and color and how these things are going to look. And I can remember times when we would literally move this stuff into the browser, get the web font rendering, do a screen cap of the type in the browser and bring it back into Photoshop so that we could show accurate web type. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? Why don't we just put it in the browser?
Right.
I think it's really about letting go of control. That's the biggest thing that I see. We've wasted so much time making things perfect in Photoshop, knowing that they're never going to actually look like that. It's just not realistic.
So as far as responsive images go, there's a few things out there like picture fill and some great options, but nothing really solidified or set in stone. What do you think is the best solution right now?
Well, things are getting solidified. So I think the first draft is out for both picture and source set, if I recall, very, very recently. So those things are happening. There's lots of heated dialogue still happening about those things, and I think that in the end, that's going to be what we really need. There's tons of solutions for this stuff, though. There's everything from proxy-based solutions where you've got ResourceIt, RESRC.IT, which I haven't actually tried yet, but I know that it's similar to some of the stuff Sencha was doing. And what that does is basically you can just modify the URL of your image, and so it's easy to implement, right? But it does come along with some other interesting implications. What happens is that you're modifying it by changing a server, putting a new server basically on the front of the URL. So someone else gets the request, a different server. They parse out your image, which is still in the URL, take it to their server. Also, they inspect, user agent stuff. So they're doing some device classification, scaling that device, sending it back to you. Scaling the image and sending it back to you. So performance concerns, obviously, right? You're kind of dependent on someone else to solve that problem for you. Maybe you don't really just want it to be set to the size of the resolution of the device, but a very easy to use kind of solution. You can also do that same kind of thing on your own server, with a little bit of HT access and, basically grabbing any image type and, doing the exact same kind of thing, but doing it low on your box. Actually picture fill is a really good solution. I mean, Scott has done a fantastic job with that, and it's, if you're going to implement it, I would say do something where you, in your CMS, give the ability to kind of at some point in the future generate the actual picture syntax when it's ready, but I mean, it's very well tested. People are using it with great success. So I think that's a very valid solution right now. There's all kinds of other crazy things that people are trying, but in the end, I think we just need a little bit better HTML element,
Yeah, definitely. So. They're working on it, right?
Yeah.
So just what do you think will be the major improvements to responsive web design this year?
Well, I feel like some bigger organizations are finally starting to get on board with some of this stuff. So some of the requests that we're getting for, 3 or 4 ROI case studies, we'll finally start to have some of that data available, which I think will only encourage more to do so. So I think there's going to be that move, from some bigger companies, some big e-commerce type stuff that's going to be happening this year, I know. So that's really exciting. I think I talk about this a little bit, and I wrote an article called The Responsive Dip. And it's kind of based on just the idea of how humans learn things. And you move through these 4 stages of learning. And I feel like we are at a stage where we are finally starting to actually understand that we're not really doing this quite right. We have to rethink a lot more of what we've done. Sometimes you actually get worse at doing something before you get better. That's kind of the idea. I think for us as an industry, that's part of what's happening here. We are actually, and Jacob Nielsen's study not too long ago, where there was so much, and Josh Clark responded, so many people wrote back about, Jacob kind of said, based on data of testing mobile-specific sites versus sort of responsive sites, he found that the usability of the responsive sites was much worse. And his recommendations were to do something like build a mobile site, cut content, cut features, and give them a link to a full site. Obviously many people in the industry said, wait a second, what are you talking about? That's a bad idea. You're making a lot of assumptions about context and all these things, which I agree with. But I understand how Jacob arrived at the conclusion that he did. And that's because we've built very non-performant sites with lousy user experiences. We just haven't, we're learning, We actually are getting, I think in some respects we've gotten worse at doing web design by trying to sort of figure this stuff out. But we're going to come out of that dip of learning, and we're going to be, I think, in a much better place. We're starting to see some sites come out that are like demonstrating that this stuff can really work. So I think this is going to be the year where we start to see some really creative, responsive type solutions, and we start to see real, organizational change, which is required to sort of invite this kind of process to happen at a bigger company in particular. I just think there's so much happening there. And so for me, the future of this stuff, at least for the next year, what I see is it's really more about the hardest stuff to figure out, which is not the technical stuff. It's the politics of the organization that have to adjust. That's the hard stuff. All the people who build sites, they see this stuff and it's obvious, right? This makes sense. This is how it should be. We're finally embracing the fluid nature of our medium, But it's the people who aren't as technical, but who are making, money decisions, financial decisions in an organization, and have to say, yes, it's okay for you all to sit together in the same room, and for me to not know exactly how long this is going to take the first couple times you do it.
Right.
That's a hard decision, for a financial person to make, a business person.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap it up with the future of responsive web. So where can they keep up with your work and keep up with you?
The Sparkbox website, csparkbox.com. And on Twitter, just Ben Callahan, all one word. And I have bencallahan.com if you want to see where I'm going to be speaking or what I'm writing about, those kinds of things. And then the Build Responsively workshop is coming around, so try to find one of those, and we'd love to meet you guys there.
Cool. Well, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Until next time, thanks for watching.